Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Racial Justice through Reimagining Policing. This is Calvin Jackson. He is our tech wizard tonight. Tonight we will be hearing from an expert panel on how we can use creative new policing methods to benefit all of us, police and civilians. Our hope is that we will be able to learn and contribute to creating safe, strong communities. This special event is offered by the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. And it's the kickoff to a series of special online forums that we will be doing to break down policing into digestible bites in terms of reimagining policing in order to continuously move this conversation forward. I'm Bridget Wolfgang, your facilitator for this panel tonight. And our wonderful Calvin Jackson, as we saw, is our tech wizard. We also have Clara Licata, who is the chair of our Advocacy and Legislative Committee. She will be manning the chat and facilitating the question sections of tonight. We are so grateful for her and her participation tonight. As you're putting any questions or comments in the chat, you can use the chat or the Q&A, which we hope is down at the bottom of your screen. We are all members of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, and we look forward to learning and talking with you tonight. This special forum will last for 1 hour and 30 minutes. If you'd like, before we begin, go ahead and put your name in the chat, where you're from in Delaware, or if you're coming in from another state. We as panelists love to see who's joining us tonight. And feel free to add if you're part of a group or organization, if you're part of a police group or any agencies. We love to know who we have in this dialogue tonight. We are so excited to have all of you here. As you guys are doing that, we would like to take a moment to thank Charlotte King, our founder of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, and all of the steering committee for helping us to put together and for supporting us in putting together this important panel. Special thanks go out to our ad hoc committee members here with us tonight, dedicating tireless hours to gathering information, coordinating these special forums. Can't thank you guys enough. We are honored to have many esteemed panelists with us tonight. First, we have our Attorney General for the great state of Delaware, General Kathleen Jennings. We would also like to welcome Representative Kendra Johnson, who is chair and representative of the Black Caucus, leading legislative change here in Delaware. We would like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Jim Nolan, former Wilmington police officer and currently chair of the Sociology Department at West Virginia University. Dr. Nolan has extensively researched and written on the topic of what real effective change in reimagining policing can look like. Finally, it is my honor to introduce Ms. Lakeisha Nix, an active advocate for change and for the rights and interests of communities and impacted individuals. As an impacted individual herself, having lost her brother in a police shooting in Wilmington this past year, we truly appreciate her voice and the input that she brings tonight. Welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you. We truly appreciate your time and contributions and are so excited to spend this time with you. It is a true privilege to be with you all tonight and to facilitate such an important panel and discussion. As the name indicates, we are dedicating this time to discuss racial justice through reimagining policing. We will have time for each of our panelists to discuss what this may look like through their lens of expertise. And then we will save time at the end to come together and exchange some questions and ideas about how we can move forward to create safe, strong communities. We sometimes mistakenly think that we need to have strictly just a law enforcement approach to policing, or that the terms law enforcement and policing are synonymous. But really, I was blown away to learn so much and find that police can take so many different forms. A law enforcement aspect to policing may remain important regardless of the approach, but tonight we also want to highlight alternative ways police, civilians, policymakers, communities can all work together and create safe, strong communities. It's interesting, actually. I'm certainly not a reimagining police expert or a criminal justice expert. A little background about me, I'm actually in the mental health field. I am a licensed psychologist with a passion for understanding people and behavior, change, and what works and what doesn't work. Like so many others, I've been drawn to this topic due to the social injustices that we've seen, over the past few years, and especially that have come to light over the last year since George Floyd. I've seen such value in this work of reimagining policing and in moving this discussion forward, and what growth can happen. I see reimagining policing as an avenue of hope for communities and for police, that this can be a way to create real change and create a collaboration and a trusting relationship and move forward. Interestingly, I found a lot of conversations about policing remind me of many conversations I had in the past through my work and in private practice, working with families and individuals, particularly parents. Like I said, I'm certainly not a policing expert, but rather I do love research and understanding behavior and dynamics. I'll try not to geek out on the research too much, but when I was getting my doctorate, I found real value in understanding behavior, motivation, and self-efficacy, or the ability for growth and for change and for success. Many approaches to behavior change and specifically within discipline and behavior change in that regard can be really challenging topics. And many parents, when seeking help from a professional like me, often may express frustration over behavior management that doesn't work, or approaches that may not be accepted or condoned, like spanking. And approaches that replaced spanking maybe weren't quick, easy approaches, and weren't really necessarily as effective as parents maybe wanted them to be. So what approaches did replace spanking, even though they weren't quick, easy Band-Aid approaches, they do work. So they rely on proactive approaches that set the individual up for success with learning, resources, support for success, relationship building strategies. They're also key here, in that the relationship itself is a motivator and a tool in the change process. And finally, specifically building the individual's own abilities in making good choices and overall self-efficacy prove effective time and time again. Now, these approaches aren't easy, but they are worth it and far more effective than spanking, with less violent and damaging side effects. So it's like a win-win, right? So in policing, we see many places struggling right now with crime rates and rising crime, ineffective approaches. It's almost like some people might feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. We know that we need to address the racial injustices and recognize that Black Lives Matter and support the movement, while also seeing that we continue to need police and to really focus on building safe communities and neighborhoods. It seems we see in the news how some areas have backed off arrests and some of the means associated with maybe a traditional law enforcement approach to policing. However, I'd say that that's like the parents I spoke about a little bit earlier, taking away the spanking approach without replacing it with anything. And that's just not doing anything and letting the behavior run. So I use this metaphor how, like in parenting, we need to develop proactive approaches in reimagining policing that can actually render themselves more effective in the long term. Well, that's enough about me. Nobody came here to hear about my background. Let's turn it over to our wonderful panelists who have real experience and expertise to make this conversation happen. It's my honor to introduce our first panelist, our Attorney General, Kathleen Jennings. Born and raised in Wilmington, General Jennings graduated from Mount Pleasant High School University of Delaware, and Villanova University Law School before joining the Delaware Department of Justice. Throughout her career, she has worked as a prosecutor for the Delaware Department of Justice, was named Delaware State Prosecutor, and later went on to serve as Chief Deputy Attorney General for the Delaware Department of Justice. She is now our 46th Attorney General, serving us here in the great state of Delaware. Welcome, General Jennings.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you everyone for inviting me this evening. It's an honor and a privilege to be your Attorney General and to be with you here tonight to discuss this really important topic. I also want to say that I am honored to be on a panel with Lakeisha Nix. Lakeisha, it's good to see you. And Professor James Nolan, Bridget, and Representative Kendra Johnson, with whom we have worked closely in the legislature to enact policing reforms. So I really wish we were in person, but those days are in our hopefully short-term future because I miss the human touch that we so deeply need. And that is frankly part of what I'd like to talk about tonight. When George Floyd was murdered, it added, frankly, an exclamation point to what I know has been centuries of systemic racism in this country. And in the aftermath of his murder, we got to work in the Justice Department on real police reform, but you have to look at yourself and say, what is it that we're trying to fix? Certainly Derek Chauvin deserved to be tried, he deserved to be convicted, and he deserves to be in jail. No question about it. His behavior was outrageous. And so that behavior ignited a national and international, in fact, a worldwide protest. And what I remember about those protests, I participated in some of those protests, in the largest in Wilmington, to really say, look, citizen Kathy Jennings, not Attorney General, we have to make changes here, and we have to make sure that those changes mean something. And what I have come to believe after, as you mentioned, Bridget, reading a lot and experiencing over the years, the divide I was seeing in a greater and greater aspects between policing and communities. I know we have Chief Tom Spell in the audience, and I'd love to hear from him at some point, because he can speak to both his time in the Wilmington Police Department together with Professor Nolan, as well as his role now as Chief of Police in Lewis, Delaware. But what I was seeing, and what I have sort of put my goals toward, my resources toward in the office, is narrowing that divide. Because right now, it seems like there is huge distrust of the police in many of the communities that we serve. And there is, on the flip side, the police often feeling like they are completely under siege, that they have gone into their bunkers and they're not coming out. And so there has to be an answer to this. There has to be a willingness for us to all sit down at a table and start talking with each other. And the hardest thing for any of us to do, when we started to make changes in the criminal justice system, there's a lot of resistance to those changes, a lot of resistance. The hardest thing for us to do is to look inside ourselves and say, how can we change? How can we be open to the voices that are saying to us, don't you understand the racial aspects of this? Don't you understand the history that has brought us here today. And so, it's been my goal to really focus on those things that will truly bring us back together. And the first of those things was to really work with our wonderful legislators, Representative Johnson and so many others, to do something that will start to rebuild trust in our communities, and that is body-worn cameras. We devoted a great deal of resources internally, working with stakeholders across the state, including police, including community activists who were telling us what they wanted to see, and getting a solid number together. This is how much it's going to cost the state of Delaware to put a body-worn camera on every police officer in our state. And I am happy to say that that law was passed, and that law will come to fruition. Tomorrow morning, the governor will sign that bill and it will become law. And we will be among the first states in the country where every police officer will wear a body-worn camera. Advocates wanted it, police wanted it, and the legislature, together with our advocacy, made it happen. That's a really crowning achievement, but there is so much more that needs to be done. We needed to change our use of force statute in Delaware, because the test for whether it is lawful for someone to use force, civilian and police included, was a subjective test. And that's not right. There should be a reasonableness component. It should be an objective test. That's what the US Supreme Court has long ago told us it should be. And Delaware was one of the only states in the country where it was an entirely subjective test. And so we sought to change that law as well, and we were able to get that law. And now our use of force statutes are in line with the vast majority of states in our country. And why is that important? Because it's not a matter of what I believe, it's whether that use of force was reasonable, whether a jury would believe that that use of force was reasonable. And let me give you an example of that. Years ago, I authorized the prosecution of a Dover police officer. Here's what he did. He was looking for and had located, along with other officers, a man they suspected of a robbery. That man went down on the ground and surrender, down on the ground and surrender. The police officer walked up to that man, posed no danger to anyone, kicked him in the head, knocked him out, broke his jaw. He had a concussion. He was severely traumatized, severely injured. It was all caught on tape. There was a motor vehicle recorder, and we prosecuted him for that offense. We took it to trial. And given the subjective use of force standard that existed in the state, we were not able to get a conviction. And so when I see something that doesn't work, we need to change it. And so we went about trying to change that. But it's a much bigger issue than legislation alone. No one thing is going to bring us together. There has to be a deeper understanding of the hate that has divided us, because racism is by nature hate. And so we have to figure out ways where communities and policing can come together so each is working toward the greater good. And I leave it up to Professor Nolan because he's the expert. But what I can tell you is I have seen it work. There's a Wilmington police officer named Dan Seligman. He's a great friend of mine. Lieutenant Dan is what everyone called him in West Center City, Wilmington. He walked West Center City every day. He knew everybody who lived on his beat. And when I walked with him, people came out of their cars to talk to him. They'd stop and come out of their cars. They came out of their houses to talk with him, and they loved him. I mean, he had done some really concrete things for people. He had gotten like hundreds of packages of diapers, a whole truckload full, and brought it to that neighborhood. He had done other things to help them. He never put handcuffs on one resident. He knew them all by name, and they knew Lieutenant Dan. Crime went down in that neighborhood. Violent crime went down demonstrably in that neighborhood. And I credit it with true community policing, where there was trust between a police officer the community could believe in and the police officer who showed that he cared. And you know, it's a pretty simple way to describe it, but it's a very, very complex problem. I believe that police officers want the same thing. I have talked to police officers, most recently in Dover, who said, we want to get to know our communities. We want to understand their needs, and we want to come together. And they were willing to do that outreach. And I think Dover police are doing that outreach. It's really phenomenal. And I credit them with having the courage to just get outside themselves and say, we're going to face these issues and we're going to change if we need to change. And so what I have to say is, I don't have all the answers for sure. No one does. The problems that divide us go back centuries. I mean, they go back to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you know, when John Lewis walked across it, and you know, the sheriff's department and their officers were there to beat them for standing up for their voting rights, for their civil rights. At the same time, I also know there are police officers who have saved lives heroically in communities that they serve. 3 Wilmington police officers just were shot, you know, a short while ago, responding to a domestic violence situation where they believed that a woman was in danger of grievous harm, and they were shot just responding to that. So, you know, we have a tremendous amount of work to do on this. I would like to see the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights bill that has been filed in the Senate pass into law. It will undoubtedly get changed along the way, as it should, but you know, the public has a right to know when there have been substantiated instances of serious misconduct. And that will also help to build trust. So each and every one of these measures is designed to bring us together so that we can protect the communities that we serve, and at the same time, the communities can trust that policing is a noble profession, which it is at its core. So thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Hi, General Jennings. I just wanted to thank you so much for those remarks. And you're speaking to my heart. I love police, and I love the police officers who I've known in my life. And I've always lived a life where I was glad when police came to my life. And in our meetings and in talking with communities, we really hope to build make steps forward in building all communities having the chance to feel that way that I always felt in my way. So thank you.
Well put. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you. Okay. It is now my honor to introduce Representative Kendra Johnson. Representative Kendra Johnson is an esteemed member of our legislature here in Delaware, representing District 5, I believe, right? Representative Johnson? Representative Johnson has dedicated her life to serving individuals with disadvantages and life challenges. This still has been a driving force in her career. Having been born and raised in the city of Chester in an extended family home environment, it was through that experience where she learned the value of service to others. Those experiences were a catalyst that continues to drive her passion today. Representative Johnson graduated from Chester High School in 1987 and eventually went on to earn a master's degree in human services from Lincoln University, and is currently an executive director at Elwyn, one of the nation's oldest nonprofit organizations. Representative Johnson has served on the board of directors for the Chester YWCA. After transitioning from Pennsylvania to Delaware, she continued with her desire to serve by joining the Bear Crossing Maintenance Corporation Board of Directors, where she has been a member since 2011. Representative Johnson is also serving as the board president of the Ability Network of Delaware, formerly known as DELARF, which is an advocacy group focused on nonprofit providers of human services. In accord with her passion for education, she was also a member of the Gunning Bedford PTA. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Johnson. We look forward to your comments and contributions.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me this evening. Just, wow, I'm honored to be a part of the conversation. And more than anything, I wanted to listen. So I truly enjoyed listening to Kathy. And I thought, well, she covered most of the things I wanted to discuss. So, maybe I can cut a few things down. But I just really wanted to listen, because what I know and what I believe is that it takes all of us, it takes our collective thoughts, our collective energy to move change forward. So I'm just like, I want to absorb as much as I possibly can. I came to, yes, provide some, a little bit of information. And just for the record, I am not an expert, okay? Not an expert. But I really wanted to listen. So I will share with you what I have prepared for this evening. So again, thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. As you shared, Representative Kendra Johnson of the 5th District, tonight I'm here, I guess in double duty, because I also serve as the chair for Delaware's Legislative Black Caucus. Our vice chair is Representative Chakwocha, and our founding member, and I affectionately think of her as founding mother, the Representative Stephanie T. Holden. T is for terrific, just in case anyone wants to know, okay? And if she sees this, she will know. The Delaware Legislative Black Caucus, we have increased our numbers. In 2018, there were 8 of us, and in the 150th General Assembly, there were 8, and now in the 151st General Assembly, we've increased our numbers because people voted for more African Americans, and there are now 12 of our 12 members of the Delaware Legislative Caucus. So what I plan to share with you this evening is some of the highlights that are associated with the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus's Justice for All agenda. And then I kind of wanted to set it up for you as well, and not just with the agenda, but just how my mind works. When I think about change and I think about reimagining, I think of it in terms, because I'm very practical, in terms of policy. Having been a executive director for many years, the first thing I think about is policy. How do I get to change human behavior, right? I change through policy. And then in the role of a legislator, I think policy, and I also think laws. But as Kathy, said, like, yeah, some of those things can maybe start, can be the catalyst, but ultimately behavior has to change for all things to change, right? So I have notes here, you'll have to bear with me. I will provide you with some of our highlights, and then just wrap it up for you. How about that? Okay. So earlier I talked about the Justice for All agenda, and the Justice for All agenda literally just 2020, June 2020, we were already going through so many things, right? And then all of the civil unrest and all things related to George Floyd, and just everything just really bubbled up to the top. As an African American, this is my life. Like, I know this is, you prepare your children with the talk. You know, I have a 17-year-old son, a 17-year-old daughter, a set of twins, but having to prepare my children for those things, that was my life. I believe for so many others, it was a myth, right? Surely, Kendra, you are overreacting. And then people saw George Floyd on their TVs, on social media, and then the myth was gone. How about that? Because now it was real. Like, you can identify with something sometimes, depending on whether or not you have the openness to identify. With Kendra telling you the fears I have as a Black mother. But when you see it, suddenly that is real. So George Floyd made a lot of things real for not only the United States, but for the entire world. So in June 2020, as a result of all of that, our Justice for All agenda was put together, okay? And we created priorities, and we worked with Kathy and her amazing team as well, you know, looking at issues related to policing, racial justice, police brutality, and, you know, just thinking about all of the other deaths of Black people that have occurred over time. And, you know, what do we need to do? And so we pledged that we would work towards an array of reforms, including establishing two task force, the African American Task Force, which looks at all things related to African Americans and struggles and inequalities and things like that, and just really coming up with solutions, or at least presenting those solutions and those recommendations for the greater good, and also in creating the law enforcement task force as well. We, you know, in June, I remember the day, and Kathy, you were there. Sorry, I got to keep saying Kathy. You know, we stood outside, we had on our mask. I think it had to be like 90 some odd degrees. It was really hot. And we stood out to show Delawareans, like, your Black Caucus and all of our colleagues, we are here for you, we're standing with you. And then we revealed this entire package of legislation that we hope to work on and ultimately pass. And when I tell you, you know, yes, the Black Caucus stood there, but so many of our colleagues stood shoulder to shoulder with us, even if they didn't fully understand what Black Americans were feeling in that moment. They were there to say, we got your back. We got your back. And it was a beautiful thing. And I share that to say, because of that showing of we have your back, a lot of the initiatives that we put forth as part of the Justice for All agenda were indeed passed. So I want to share some of those pieces of legislation with you, okay? So some, okay, this was passed in the previous General Assembly. This was 150th, and I imagine, I hope everyone already knows this piece of legislation. It was prohibiting police from using chokeholds, and that was from the 150th General Assembly. Another piece, and Kathy already talked about this, and that's requiring law enforcement officers to wear body cameras. And yes, tomorrow we'll all be standing out there. Hopefully it won't be as hot as it was in June 2020, but this is a huge deal, you know, not only for the communities, but for police officers as well. So we're extremely excited about that. Another piece, ending the practice of publicly disseminating and publishing juvenile mugshots for most offenses. automating Delaware's expungement process. Kathy talked about this already as well, creating an objective use of force standard. You know, all of these things working together, policies and laws to be the catalyst for the change that needs to happen throughout all of our communities. And, you know, we still have work to do. And while a lot of legislation has been passed, and we are definitely proud of that and so very happy that our colleagues stood with us in that moment. What we also know is that there is still so much more work to do. For example, Senator Tizzy Lockman is the lead on the LEABOR, amending Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, and I am the House Prime. A lot of conversations have happened. A lot of conversations will continue to happen. Why? Because it is important to have all stakeholders at the table so that we get this right. We know it needs to happen, but we want it to be right. So I'm hopeful, I remain hopeful that when we get back in January, you know, well, one, we'll be having a lot of conversations between now and before we get back in January. But when we get back in January, we're going to hit the ground running, and we're going to move that piece of legislation along, like so many other pieces of legislation associated with the Justice for All agenda, and pieces that are not, things that just make sense as it relates to keeping people safe. Plain and simple. And so when I think about reimagining, and this takes it back to the very first thing, remember, executive director, policy, right? Behavior, that's how I change, that's how I drive the change. I tell you what the expectations are, and then also I show you those things. I try to model the expected behavior. And then as a legislator, with laws. And then just as a regular person, how do we reimagine change and policing? By having these type of conversations, these type of forums where we're all together putting, you know, throwing everything up on the wall and literally reimagining what this could be like. So I see this as just a huge step, and that we have to continue to have these type of conversations and involve all people in it. So I want to leave you with this, because I did say, if I hit my 15 minutes, just mute me, okay? But this is what I needed to share with you. 1 second. Because I truly, I believe this. One of the things I always think about is I go back to when I was working on my master's degree and, you know, learning about Plato and Aristotle and all of these other fabulous people. There's this quote that just always lives with me, and it's from Aristotle, and it goes something like, "Good is what we all aim." And that sticks with me, because I'm like, I believe in my heart of hearts that we all are good, right? And that we all want good, and we want the best for one another. So I just wanted to share that with you, and then just read this last little piece related to that, okay? If you're interested in learning more. I'm a little geeky, what can I say? But one of the things it says, it talks about good. It says, you know, therefore practical wisdom, as he conceives it, cannot be acquired solely by learning general rules. We must also acquire through practice those deliberative, emotional, and social skills that enable us to put our general understanding of well-being into practice in ways that are suitable for each occasion. So I wanted to wrap it all up and put the bow on it. Yeah, we have rules, you know, but we're all good. We need to apply the right behavior, and we have to continue to come together in forums like this to hear one another and work together in reimagining what our lives can be like and the lives for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. That was beautiful. You're quoting philosophy and speaking about behavior change. Those are like the two ways to my heart. Thank you. Yes, coming together and having these conversations and moving this dialogue forward. We don't have one answer in each of these conversations. We continue each time to get a layer deeper and a layer deeper and a layer deeper. And one thing we'll get to do later is really listen to some impacted individuals and community members. And that's really what I hope does guide some of our behaviors or some of our actions here in what will really help to move this conversation forward and to reimagine policing. So thank you so much for that, Representative Johnson. We're so happy to have you and your leadership and all that you're doing. We do have, before we go to our next panelist, we do have a surprise special guest who, Jim, I hope you don't mind. I was gonna offer if Aubrey Plaza wanted to come on and say hello real quick, our favorite Delaware celebrity, if we can spotlight Aubrey Plaza. Calvin, can you put the spotlight on Aubrey?
Am I coming in loud and clear?
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Coming at you live from a parking lot in downtown Los Angeles. Anyway, I've been on since the beginning. I just want to say I am also not an expert in any of this at all. All I can say is just like Representative Kendra said, like it's all about people coming together, sharing ideas, and listening and trying to make change, you know, legislation change, but just all kinds of change just in the way people think about things. And I just think I'm so interested to hear what Jim Nolan has to say. I know he has such smart ideas on this topic, and I'm just, you know, all I can do is, you know, use whatever platform I have to try to bring people together and listen to each other. And the spirit of that is what I'm all about, and what I know you are all about, Bridget. So I'm so happy to be included, and I'm happy to just listen and learn, and you know, try to do my part too. But I just want to say thank you to everybody on this panel. This is awesome, and these are exactly the kinds of things that will actually make change. We can all make a difference if we come together, and that is my 4-H speech. So thank you guys so much.
We do. We love you, Aubrey. Delaware is always so happy when you represent us and when you celebrate us. For anyone who doesn't know, Aubrey is a local Wilmington, born, bred, well raised, and she is a true Delaware spirit, a Delaware celebrity, and we love when she uses her platform for these types of things. So thank you so much for joining, Aubrey. And I think Dr. Jim Nolan couldn't have gotten a better introduction than that. How about that?
Dr. Jim, so cool to see you. Okay, I was just gonna say we were neighbors. Remember, you knew me as a kid, and you can't tell anybody what you saw. But
I have fond memories of you as a little kid in your neighborhood.
All right, we'll talk about that later. All right, I'm getting off, but thank you guys for including me. This is awesome.
Aubrey.
Thank you, Aubrey.
Right. I will be
Dr.
here.
Nolan, thank you, Aubrey. Get back to your filming, get back to set.
I will. All right, guys.
Dr. Nolan, I do have a bit of an intro I can still give. So if I can still give you a little bit of an introduction, I'd be happy to. We get to turn the spotlight and the screen over to Dr. Jim Nolan, former Wilmington police officer and expert on reimagining policing. Dr. Nolan is chair of the sociology department at West Virginia University and has extensively researched and written on this topic of what real effective change in reimagining policing can look like. So as Aubrey said, Dr. Jim, take it away.
Okay, thank you. It's so great to be here with everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen if I can. Can you see my PowerPoint slide? I hate to do a PowerPoint slide because the first two speakers were so speaking from the heart, and it was so engaging. And now I have like numbers and pictures and those sorts of things.
Well, you are the research expert, so we do.
Oh,
need
good.
that.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. First, thank you, Bridget. And I want to thank the other panelists. It's always good to be back in Delaware, even if it's just a virtual visit. I always like to see Kathy Jennings, and I appreciate being part of one of the guests from the Alliance. And sort of shocked to see Aubrey, and very happy to have her support in this. For just to reiterate what Bridget says, I work at WVU. I'm chair of the Department of Sociology, and for the past 20 years, I've been doing research on policing, funded research on policing. And so I have some information to share with you today. But I wasn't always just a researcher. I was also a police officer. For 13 years, I worked in a number of divisions: patrol, drug, organized crime and vice, community policing. I was a sergeant and lieutenant. I attended the Wilmington Police Academy and the FBI National Academy. And I worked for a short time at the FBI after I finished a PhD before joining the faculty. So my research has focused on the topic of neighborhood dynamics and situational policing. And I have a book out this year called Policing in an Age of Reform, an agenda for research and practice. And so all of this material, I want you to know, the attendees to know, if you contact me, I'll make sure to get you information, links to articles that are on this topic. Again, I'm not claiming that what I'm saying is right, but it adds to the conversation. It links to research that others are doing in the field. We're all trying to figure this out. So this is, in addition, we have more material. The message of police reform is somewhat of a difficult one, even if you frame it as reimagining the police. It's often misinterpreted as an attack on the police. But if you listen closely to the details, it'll become obvious that the opposite is true. We here on the panel and at the Southern Alliance for Racial Justice are trying to help an important institution in order to keep both the citizens and the police safe. But there's widespread and growing concerns in the profession about its future. So I want to offer a perspective that I think will help. So I want to begin with the end in mind. My final point is this, and then I'll go back and I'll explain it. Racism in Delaware policing is structured. Some call it systemic. This means it occurs in regular patterns because officers are following policy rather than deviating from it. A lot of times the work, and I've been involved in helping different organizations deal with police reform, particularly after George Floyd's death. And there's a lot of efforts being put on chokeholds and cameras and accountability structures, which are all important. Transparency is important in terms of building these relationships. However, the idea that these things are structured and built in is not necessarily the bad apple that is the problem, but it's oftentimes the good apple following policy that leads to these problems. So before this event, I had been thinking about some of the issues that I might talk about, and in May I published an op-ed in the News Journal. I had some help from my colleagues at the Alliance. But my position here was in reimagining the police, that the police profession and the law enforcement approach is often confused. Like, how many times do we talk about law enforcement as it is the profession? And I have students who come to me and say, I want a career in law enforcement. There's a Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force, and I'm a member of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, and there's a Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. So when we talk about policing, we sometimes mix these terms. So I write this, I have this quote that I pulled from the op-ed. Law enforcement is a strategy in the field of policing, just as hammering nails is a strategy in the field of carpentry. However, where carpenters are evaluated on the products they build, rather than the 1,000 nails they hammer, there is no final product in policing. So what we're trying to do is reimagine a policing, and where we argue that they need to build something, that the police should be responsible for building something. So I have four things that I want to talk about in my remaining time. The first one is the roots of the current problems are sociological. A lot of times we tend to tie problems to bad apples, to bad seeds, to people who are problematic in general, but really the roots go back to the sociological understanding, where the field of policing and its rules and its logic are connected to a mindset and a reward structure that shapes what's happening in policing. Also, the second thing is racism is structured by the law enforcement approach. The result of it's the result of good apples following policy. The third is the law enforcement approach to policing does not work the way we think it does. It's somewhat of an illusion. And so we hang with it. And then the fourth is Reimagine Policing should aim at building strong communities. So I'll start with the sociological view. So the sociological view is the roots of the problem are in the field of policing itself. It produces a mindset in officers and a disposition and a way of seeing the world. And it also is tied to reward structure. So I want to show you this picture first, and it can be a little complicated when you first hear it if you're not trained to think about it this way. But if you look at a sport like football, when you walk onto the field of football, you wear a particular uniform, you know how to line up, you know what a good play is from a bad play. If someone's running at you with the football and they're on the other team, you know to tackle them. And so the logic doesn't come from you. The logic originates in the field itself. But the field is then, the mindset is shaped by the field. So in other words, the logic of the game is internalized in the players. And they take on an image, it's embodied in a sense that they not only learn to think like football players, but they also learn to carry themselves like football players. So there's this embodiment of the field. And that's reinforced by the reward structure. So in the game of football, it's, you see these helmet awards, there's cheering and there's pay raises and all of that kind of thing. Now I know in the past 10 years or so, there's been a lot of emphasis on concussions in professional football. And so they've been paying for new helmets, there's new penalties, there's new strategies, there's cameras that follow the players in slow-mo. They watch everything that's happening. They penalize officers, they eject them from the games. There's all kinds of efforts to prevent bad actors from behaving in the game. But if you look at the data, it's like a steady line. It's like the trend line is steady. It hasn't dropped. The injuries are still happening. And in the other thing I learned in thinking about it this way, I learned that there's been 2 national studies of injuries in football, high school injuries in football. And it turns out that only 2% of the injuries in football are related to penalties. 98% are related to good plays. And I think this is analogous to what's happening in policing. It's not necessarily, it doesn't mean that there's not bad actors and people violating the rules, but the real problems are more embedded in the structure. And I'll show you how that happens. So the field of policing is, before any of us joined, there was a logic to policing. There was a game being played. Here's a picture of a graduation class, the people socializing the academy. The mindset that comes from the academy and the socialization process inside of policing is internalized inside the person. It creates a disposition in the officers. And that disposition is not helpful in what we're talking about. That disposition is like, you hear from some police officers, I got to watch my back. We have to go home safe at night. These are the things, I'm separating myself from the community. We're protecting ourselves and our rights as officers, and caring a little bit less about what happens to the community members. This is all reinforced by symbols of success. You see, and I did this myself, so I'm not, claiming to be innocent of any of this, but you lay out the products of your raids, and you look for ribbons and those sorts of things. So it's this process. You just can't look at the officer and say, will you change the way you act while you're keeping the game the same? It just won't work. And so I looked at the directives in Wilmington and how people get awards in Wilmington. Almost all commendations are awarded by apprehensions. So if you just look at the Class A commendation, for example, you see that the apprehension for first-degree assault, burglary, drug trafficking, and 5 drug arrests in a given year. Now, this in itself, you can see, well, I need them to make lockups. But the thing is, when you're dangling that carrot, that reward, based on a law enforcement activity, like if I can get access into a car when say a tail light's out or something like that, I can run a tag, I can sniff to see if I smell marijuana, I can look for a reason to make an arrest and to basically try to make a lockup and make a seizure. And all these things all of these awards are the same. That they all require apprehensions. They all require law enforcement. And law enforcement is what they do. In Delaware, in the state of Delaware, between 2010 and 2019, 350,000 people were arrested. This isn't traffic tickets. This is like 40% of all the people who live in the state. And in the city of Wilmington, it's 70,000 people. 70,000 people is, the 45,000 is about 65% of all the people who live in Wilmington. So it's not like the police are not working to solve crimes necessarily. These are 21,000 for drugs, for curfew violations, for disorderly conduct. And at one point I looked at the police data, and the #1 charge that Wilmington police officers were charging people with was resisting arrest. So it's a law enforcement game, and this is what they're actually doing. But if you look at the results, at least in terms of the crime rates, for example, in the latest report by the FBI in terms of crime rate, Wilmington was in the top 10 out of 754 cities over 50,000 in population. I mean, there were Baltimore and New Orleans and Camden and other cities also that were a little bit ahead, but Wilmington is high. And if you look at the crimes cleared, you see that here's a list of crimes that occurred in Wilmington from 2001 and 2015. And you look at 289 murders, 55% are not solved. They're not cleared. If you scan down, you look at robbery, 76% are unsolved. Burglary, 89% are unsolved. And all the way down, you see theft from motor vehicle parts. There's 5,000 occurred during this period, and 98% are unsolved. And there's this illusion that the police are there and they're going to protect us. And what I'm going to show you is that it's really an impossible task. The law enforcement approach to policing really just doesn't work. It leads to racial disparities, but it also just doesn't work. Getting to the racial disparities, if you look at Delaware, I'm going to go through, this is a busy table, but I want to show you how these things are calculated. These numbers come from the number of tickets that were given in Delaware in 2019. So racial disparity index is calculated this way. The number of Black arrestees or drivers over the Black population and the white over the white population. And so if the number of 1 is, the ratios are the same. So if it's over 1, then you can see how much over 1 is it. So in this, the DSP traffic stops, 1.61, means that Black drivers are 61% more likely to be stopped by the state police. In Newcastle County, it's 3 times higher. Statewide traffic tickets, 57% higher for African Americans, 75% higher for Black drivers. Searches once stopped, almost 3 times higher risk of being searched. And you can see in all of these, I know I'm looking at my time and I'm cautious. But I want you to see that these racial disparities are huge, and they're not the result of bad apples. This is the result of good apples. This is the result of people following policy. And that's when we reimagine policing, we have to think of it as something other than law enforcement. So one way to think about it is this. Shifting the focus from catching the criminal, the bad actor, to creating safe places. And so I've been studying for the past really 15 years or so, with funding from the Department of Justice, this concept of the neighborhood atmosphere. And a neighborhood atmosphere is conceived of like a container, and it contains these things. One component is the interdependence. This is the level of residents know and trust each other. They work together to resolve community problems. They trust the police to help them do this work. Frustration is residents avoid each other. They don't work well together. And dependence is residents don't know each other very well, but they trust the police to protect them. So these levels are, they're varying levels in communities. And what I'm arguing is that the police can do something. The police and government and system can do things to build levels of interdependence. And this is why it's important. This is based on, this is a summary of some of the findings that I found both in community surveys in West Virginia, but also in 16 neighborhoods in 4 cities, which include Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and 2 neighborhoods in Wilmington. That if you put them all together and you look at the levels of frustration, you find out that if your community looks like this, at high levels of frustration, there's a 98% chance that crime is going to have occurred. 70% chance it's going to be a personal victimization. 98% chance of excessive fear of crime. But more importantly, look at the bottom 3. 2% chance that neighbors will help if someone threatens suicide. Less than 1% chance a neighbor would intervene in a fight in the street, and 2% chance that neighbors would help someone returning from prison. But just compare that with this kind of a configuration. 10% chance of crime, 1% chance of personal victimization, almost 99% chance that people will intervene to help someone returning from prison. And so this is why changing the context is important. Bridget, I'm almost wrapping.
Thank you.
Okay. So the idea of situational policing is this. If the police are assigned to particular neighborhoods and they work with the communities, and they can look at the horizontal axis is levels of crime, and this vertical axis is the levels of interdependence or levels of dependence and levels of conflict. You can develop a starting place for action. So in this particular example, we say it's an anomic neighborhood, which means there's high crime rates and people are in conflict or are dependent. The point would be is, how do we secure the community enough that we can get people involved, and so there's some organizing that can happen. The more people we can bring into the act, then we can change the neighborhood to responsive. Then community members are willing to help, and resources are available to do systems planning and coordination, all with the purpose of building strong neighborhoods. And so here's my last couple lines here. Racial discrimination in policing is structured. It occurs at regular rates through compliance with law enforcement policy, not deviating from it. The law enforcement approach is ineffective. It shapes the mindset of officers in unhelpful ways, and it rewards the wrong behaviors. It ignores outcomes. The police, for example, don't necessarily worry about mass raids and the impact it'll have on communities, or whether communities ever really get safe. Seeking racial justice and keeping the law enforcement approach is not really possible. In the same way, keeping the football game the same is not going to lead, no matter what you do, it's not going to lead substantially to injury reduction. A new policing approach must set the strong, safe neighborhood as the desired outcome. This will require a new mindset related to community building rather than community relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, Dr. Nolan. This is so wonderful. Thank you so much for taking us through the data and the research and all of these complex topics as clearly as you did. We truly appreciate it. I love some of the topics that you touched upon, the systems work, and how if we have the same policing system and the same systems that work in communities, you know, even if we change certain actors going in and out of the system, if the systems stay the system grows the same police officers after years of internalizing, right? And the systems grow the same communities at risk with the same systems. So thank you so much for highlighting that through that football analogy. That was wonderful. And that systemic change that really is needed, and the chart of moving through those different quadrants of development in neighborhoods and communities and police trusting to do that work together. How powerful would that be, right? I can't wait to get a bit deeper into this and really find out what that might look like here in Delaware. I know one major aspect of this will really be listening to communities and to address the concerns and needs of impacted individuals and communities in need. So with that, it is an honor and a privilege to begin to introduce our last panelist, Ms. Lakeisha Nix. Ms. Nix is joining us tonight from Wilmington, Delaware. Ms. Nix is active in advocating for change and for the rights and interests of communities and impacted individuals. Ms. Nix, would you like to give us a little background in terms of how police involvement has affected your life and your family?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Recently, the impact has been one of great tragedy. My brother is Lamont Moses, and Lamont was murdered in the community of Riverside in Wilmington, Delaware by Newcastle County police officers. And I don't know, it's been 6 months since that happened. And we represent the other side of the coin, basically. My family and families like ours who suffered the same tragedy. At this moment, it's been 6 months. We still don't have a word on any accountability that may occur for the people responsible for his death. And it just goes to show the unfair practices that are in place right now. It leaves family in limbo. It leaves family suffering and pain with a bunch of unanswered questions. That's the reality of what's going on with me and my family at this point. And I don't know, I would like to get to a place where officers are held, accountable for murdering people, for murdering people for reasons unknown, or for reasons that aren't I don't know, plausible. I don't know, like this is hard. It's tough for me to talk about. It's kind of exhausting and draining because I feel like so many people have the power, to change this narrative, but it's been a slow walk. It's been a slow walk for Jeremy McDowell and his family. It's been a slow walk for Yaheem Harris and his family. And now here's my family. And what happened to my brother happened a year after the riots and protests from last summer. All this waiting to make changes or making changes, but not making the bigger, more meaningful ones. And then our families have to suffer for the waiting. That's all I can really say at this moment about how I'm impacted.
Ms. Nix, I'm so grateful, and I know we're having a lot of comments come into the chat. We're so grateful for you using your voice to honor your brother tonight, for joining us and for your input here. And we are so sorry for the loss of your brother. And I know that the panelists here tonight and all of our participants, we are here so that we can walk with you and that we can see what we can do here in Delaware to really create some change going forward.
Thank you.
What do you see happening or not happening in terms of the change that you've been waiting for? You know, you mentioned over the past year or so.
What I see happening is a lot of excuses, and I also see a lot of pandering more to the police and what they're comfortable with, instead of making decisions and urgency for action focused on the communities that these police are supposed to be serving. I think it was probably about 3 weeks ago, I was pulled over by a Newcastle County police officer. Well, not me, but I was in a car with someone who was pulled over by a Newcastle County police officer. I think it was for a tent waiver. He had just got his car and didn't know that he had to get his tent waiver as soon before he pulled off the lot. It was miscommunication from the dealer who sold him the car. And something compelled me just to ask the officer. I actually had my son in the car. He's familiar with what happened to his uncle, and he was like getting nervous and like, is that Newcastle County Police? And he's only 5 years old. Is that the ones who killed my uncle? And something, my son was like, say something to him, Mom, please, just say something to him. Ask them why they killed my uncle. And I said, I am going to ask them something, son. And I got out the car and I asked them, basically, what are their issues with Leobor? And the officer turned off his camera, and then he explained to me that their issues are the issues that he's been hearing amongst his colleagues, and the issues that he has is that he doesn't want to be sued. He doesn't want his pension attacked in the event of something happens and all his hard work to go down the drain. And I get that, I get it, but I get that, but at the same time, it's like, we're talking about lives being lost here. We're talking about officers being held accountable for literally coming into communities and like doing more terrorizing and putting fear into the communities than actually serving. So I just wish that officers would like come outside of themselves and look at the impact that they're giving to the communities that they're serving, and try to think about the fact that they actually have the power to give to be more positive and give more positive impact. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Nix. And
Mhm.
we do see some questions coming in through the chat, and some people have asked if I might shed a little bit of light on what did happen to your brother. So I will try my best, and if you would like to correct anything that I say, please do. Anyone else wants to correct me, that's fine too. I'm certainly not an expert, but from my understanding, there was a situation where your brother was maybe asleep in the car, and police were called, and there was a situation of approaching him in terms of likely, arrest or some type of charge, and he drove the car away, correct? And then he was shot as he was driving the car away.
Yeah,
Is that
that's basically the gist of it. He was sleeping in his car. They approached him. Initially, they said that they put out a report that he sped towards them, and that's why officers shot. And then also they said that they got a call that about a suspicious car, but then the body worn camera footage showed that they approached him and said that they were out there looking for stolen cars. They saw that he was sleeping and quote unquote wanted to check if he was okay. And then in that interaction, my brother was, letting them know, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay. My mom lives right there. And they opened his car door, they flashed a light in there, saw a misdemeanor amount of marijuana, and basically was telling them if that's all he has, then they don't care about it. But still proceeded to like tell him that they was going to drag him out of the car. And instead of staying there, my brother decided to pull off, did a U-turn because he approached a dead end, did a U-turn, backed his car up, pulled his car over to the right to give himself enough room to drive away. And just as he was pulling off, officer number one shot into the vehicle, and that is what we believe was the fatal shot into the side of his head. And then another officer came out and shot as well. And I don't know, just a tragedy.
Ms. Nix, it is a tragedy, and my heart breaks to have to relive the video footage and to have to relive it here tonight. And so again, you know, on behalf of the Alliance, I want to express appreciation for your participation. You are
Thank
truly
you.
honoring him, you're honoring his memory, and making sure that your voice and his memory and your experiences are spoken and are active participants in these conversations. And we need you, and we celebrate you, and we honor you. And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
If you have a few more moments for just a couple more questions. What do you typically see in terms of interactions between police and communities?
Oh, I can say, like, from the time I was a teenager, growing up in Wilmington, the way the police interact with them is always like in a negative term. Like, they never really got out of their cars unless they suspected someone or of something, or just wanted to harass somebody or something like that. It was never like anything positive. Like, I heard someone speak about Lieutenant Daniel Seligman. Officers like him were few and far between. And when you have officers only coming in to exert their authority, you know, push their weight around, it really does something to a community. That's where the trust gets lost. That's where police get looked at in a negative light. And I don't know, I just wish things were different. I do. I wish that police will understand that in general, people know that they have a certain authority, and there's a certain amount of respect that we should have for them, but also respect the communities that you're serving, and understand that you're coming into vulnerable communities. You're coming into communities who are heavily impacted and actually living and walking examples of symptoms of systematic oppression. So address them as such, you know, address them with more care, concern, and compassion. There's a way to do your job and still have compassion. I oftentimes look at policing and wish that people would take the approach of the human services approach. That's a background that I come from. I've been working in human services for 2 years, and I work with people fresh out of jail, you know, people who I know have, you know, history of rape of women, and I may have to be the only woman working with them. People who have violent history and things of that nature. But because of the policies in place, or not even just that, because of my compassion and my innate instinct to help others, I come into it with more of a positive outlook. There's been times where I've been threatened. There's been times where I've seen coworkers hit. There's been times when I've been hit, but I understand the job that I took. I understand that it came with a lot of risk, but I also understand that when I walk into their presence, walk into their homes, or in their space, that I have the power to either leave a lasting impression on them or leave a bad taste in their mouth. And I wish cops would come with that approach. And you know, it's just, I don't know. I've been in these working in group homes and things of that nature, and there's been many of times where I felt unsafe and things of that nature. But you have to learn to de-escalate. You know what I mean? You have to learn to do what a reasonable person would do, and not just act off of impulse. I understand that there's policy in place that ingrains certain things in you, but what about your upbringing? What about your moral compass?
Yes, and the human service that you speak so openly and honestly, and you can tell that it's a passion of yours, and it's just a natural gift of yours. And thank you for that. And you're already hitting on this, and we have so many messages of support to you coming through the chat. So I don't want to not ask the next question, but I do just want to kind of encourage you to read that if you have a moment. But what do you think a reimagined relationship between police and community might be able to look like?
When I think of reimagine policing, I think of there's this one officer, what's his name? Well, in the community, we call him Brother Fahim. I think of people like that. I know a retired officer by the name of Eugene Brown, and I just hear the stories that he tells me about how he would approach certain people. You know, I think of people who have compassion. I think of officers who are people first. That's what I think of. I think of accountability. I think of something in place that, like a system like with in the human services field that we have, like we have to answer to the state. Like we can't just, we can't work, within our spaces and do things and not be held accountable for it, because we have someone outside of our organizations that will look into these things. So that's what I see for reimagining police.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I echo all the support and all the appreciation that's been shown to you in the chat. And we do truly appreciate your participation tonight and all the wisdom and the insight and the impact that you've shared tonight. We do open up for panelists to ask each other questions at this point. And since we've had so many wonderful speakers and so much to share and talk about tonight, we are going to use a few minutes for panelists to interact. And then if any panelists would like to stick around for the 8:30 on, maybe 10 extra minutes, we can have audience questions as well. I will certainly stick around. And so I will now open it up. However, I will segue through the powerful input we just received from Ms. Nix. And I would like to also just say that when we are blending what Jim Nolan and Lakeisha Nix just shared, I'm imagining the human who has to put on the uniform and the helmet and go onto the field, and the human who might have a change in the game. And it just makes me wonder what. I agree. I just see a comment that says Lakeisha sounds like an expert to me. I agree, Lakeisha. You may have trumped Dr. Nolan, no offense, Jim, as the expert on the panel tonight. I do want to just say that we hear from earlier panelists of we believe in the goodness and the humanness, and we believe people want to do good. And we know that that's true from psychology, from human services. We know that that's true. And we know that similarly, communities who have struggled, those individuals also want to do good. And so when we set people up for success, people are likely to reach that success. So if we can set police up for success, where they can have a system that works to actually make neighborhoods safe, if we can set neighborhoods and communities up for success, where the supports and the relationships and the access is there. I mean, I think that's what we're really talking about tonight. So thank you to all of our panelists. I now open it up to anybody who would like, any panelists who would like to pose a question or a comment to each other. Hello, Dr. Nolan.
First of all, I appreciate Lakeisha Nix. What she had to say was very profound. And I often imagine that the police in a new game that would perhaps be sleeping in a car, and they wake up and they go, "Oh, thank God it's you," to the police. You know, when the police arrive on the scene in the law enforcement mindset, they are, people are afraid. And I think that can change it by changing the game, not keeping the game the same, and asking the officers just to be kinder and nicer.
Do any other panelists want to speak to that?
I just want to say that I agree, and I thank you for your comments. And I believe that if if policing was changed the night that my brother was surrounded by those officers, then things may have went a lot differently. Thank you for your comment, Mr. Nolan.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Lakeisha and I have met, and I'm not able to talk about the investigation itself, but I just wish every police officer in the state could hear what you said. Your voice is so powerful and heartfelt, and I wish I could talk about this, but I can say this. It's why we need to work so very hard to change things. And, your brother, I only know your brother through what you've told me and what your family has told me. What a wonderful guy. I know he was the heartbeat of your whole family, taking care of everybody and making sure everybody was okay each and every day, including his mom, your mom. He should be alive today. He should be alive today. And it's incumbent upon us to make the changes necessary to right this. It is wrong. It is so wrong. And I'm just constrained. I'm sorry, so sorry, Lakeisha, but thank you for being here tonight. And I wish everybody in this state could hear what you just had to say.
Thank you, Attorney Jennings, and I appreciate you for acknowledging me, and I appreciate you for being on here to have the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Attorney General Jennings. We are coming into our final minutes. We have about 2 minutes left. I do ask any panelists who would like to stick around for audience questions at the 8:30 mark, but we do want to respect everyone's time that at 8:30 we will officially close. But anyone who wants to stick around, we will do audience questions at that point. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments before we head over to the audience?
Bridget, I am going to have to go. I'm so sorry.
We appreciate you and your time, and we understand that the time restraint is very real. So we do appreciate you. And I do think that Dr. Nolan can stick around for some audience questions. And it looks like in the chat, we do have some for you, Dr. Nolan. Ms. Nix, are you able to stick around for a few more questions?
Yeah, I can stick around for about 5 more minutes. I can.
Okay, so we have Clara Licata, who is going to be facilitating the questions.
Take
Clara,
care, everyone.
Thank you so much, General Jennings. We look forward to more conversations with all of you. And Clara, if you would like to throw out maybe a couple questions for Ms. Nix or anything that we would like to kind of address, or Representative Johnson, if you have anything you would like to discuss with Ms. Nix in the next couple minutes.
I do not, honestly. I'll just say this. Ms. Nix, I admire your courage, because this takes courage, and you convey the message eloquently. And all I can do is just imagine the tragedy and the pain that your family is enduring. And to that, I say, I am very sorry. But again, your courage, keep talking, keep telling your story, keep talking about your brother, letting people know exactly who he was and what he means to your family. So thank you for that. And I will excuse myself.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind words.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. You're on mute, Bridget.
Clara, I'll turn it over to you for any questions for Ms. Nix.
Yes, we have two kind of interrelated questions involving money. So would more money into the needs of the communities instead of policing, is that a way to move forward? And the flip side to that is, what does policing look like in communities where there is healthy housing, where people are working, where there's, you know, a strong commerce, where the money stays in the community? So is money part of the solution?
It certainly can be from my perspective. In fact, when we do these models in terms of the neighborhood development, if there's income matters in terms of health and well-being of communities, for sure. But at the same time, also the atmosphere that's created by the police, also even controlling for income. So even in poor neighborhoods where people are getting along and they watch out for each other, and the police, they trust the police, in these places are safe. So creating a more fair and just society economically is certainly important to all of this. But from a police perspective, it doesn't have to wait till we reduce income inequality to start working in communities to make places safer.
Lakeisha,
Yeah, I did want to speak to that. I think I kind of echo with Mr. Nolan. Economic justice is important, but when I'm thinking about the direct relationships between the community that I came from and the community that I live in, I feel as though it has to be, and somebody mentioned it in the comment, they like literally took the thought right out of my head. We have to hire better mindsets, better skilled people with higher morale, to police these communities. We have to hire people who care about the fact that they're in communities who are facing a lot of disparities, and that I think that trumps everything else. I've also, like I said, I grew up in the inner city, and over South Bridge, that's like one of the best places that I feel to grow up in Wilmington, because everybody takes care of everybody. Everybody's close knit. Everybody knows everybody. So the protection is kind of there. And the police can come on as partners instead of authoritative figures. That would help. I now live in Old Newcastle, and policing out here, what I see is everybody knows everybody. The police out here grew up with each other. They grew up with the people that live in the community. So when they approach people, they approach them like, you know, that's my brother. That's somebody that I grew up with. Even though I know I'm here because he did something wrong or something like that, I'm going to approach this with more care and concern. And the results are, you know, are beautiful. That person, I see people be rehabilitated and come back out from doing their time of incarceration or whatever they were sentenced to, and they come back out and they're doing much better. They're out here playing with the children and being neighborly and things of that nature. So I think it's just a breakdown of police not understanding who they're policing and generally not caring. The focus needs to be on the care. The economic part of it is needed. I'm not saying that it's not needed, but when it comes to policing and how it affects communities from where I came from, it has to be about compassion.
Ms. Nix, you raised a couple of things that relate to additional questions, and you talked about the authoritarian demeanor of the police and training. And we did have a couple of questions that asked, does the military structure of the police encourage racism? You know, how much of reimagining police has to do with how police are trained? You know, how do we recruit different mindsets and skill rates?
I think with the amending, if not abolishing, of Leopold, that will give pause to officers who are looking to come in to I don't know, to be on power trips. I'll use that word, to be on power trips. because I believe Leah Board provides a lot of protections, and it makes these officers who are out here murdering people or antagonizing people, harassing people, it makes them comfortable to do these things. I think back on Keandra McDowell, her name now is Keandra Ray, and her family, and one of the officers involved in her brother's case who constantly harasses her, and then will say things like, you know, well, I'm still going to have my job at the beginning and end of the day, and things of that nature. And they have this on record, and they go through the proper channels and report this officer, and nothing happens. It has to be. I think it has less to do with or you won't have to think too much about who you hiring, because if you hire these people, well, in the hiring process, the fact that they'll know that there are systems in place that hold officers accountable when they're doing certain things, when they're doing things out of line with the morale, there's going to be accountability. And when it comes to the morale, the departments have to kind of set a different tone, set a different standard.
I agree with that. Can I weigh in? Because I agree with Keisha on this, and that the military structure in policing is related to the game of law enforcement. If the game changes to making communities stronger, then there's no need for a paramilitary model. And even if there is a paramilitary model, but the goal is to build relationships and help people, even if it's structured as a military hierarchy, it's not going to matter, because what you're trying to achieve is connections and relationships and that sort of thing. And if the mindset of the police is just, I need to organize to make an arrest, to catch bad guys, and that's the problem in policing. I mean, it's that mindset.
I agree.
Do we have time for one more, Bridget?
Yes, and for everyone, as we go into our last question, we do have a listening session set up for August 3rd at 7 p.m. It will be our follow-up to tonight's panel. We hope that all of you can join us. Ms. Nix, we hope that you can participate as well. You're such I think someone said it earlier, a beacon and an expert in this area. And we certainly, as we reimagine policing, want to be able to listen to communities and impacted individuals and see what will work. So thank you, and thank everyone. And August 3rd at 7 p.m. we have our follow-up to tonight. Clara, go ahead and take our last question.
I think this one really is for Jim. And is there any data to show that the behavior of Black officers or officers of color is different than the behavior of white officers, or is the game so embedded that the mindset is the same?
Yeah, all the data that I see is that the Black officers and white officers that are embedded in the gaming are doing the same thing. I mean, 3 of the officers in the Freddie Gray case, for example, were Black. Most of the police shootings in Chicago against Black suspects are Black officers. And so the game of policing, although it unfairly attacks the Black community, the Black officers are just as likely, I think, to be part of a structure, a game structure where they are out making lockups. They're working in the same communities making lockups. Now, I think what Lakeisha is saying, that there are a few people that she's dealt with who are more knowledgeable, like Lieutenant Dan, for example, is one that I'm aware of, who's been working with the community and the impact that he has had on. So what I'm talking about is the averages. There's, as long as the game is a certain way, there's a couple of people that may go against the grain and do this kind of a thing, but they're the exception and not the rule. We want to make this a rule again, so that when people suddenly get pulled over by the police, they go, "Oh, thank God it's you. I need your help."
That's all I see, Bridget.
Wonderful, and that brings us to that extra 10-minute mark. And Ms. Nix, thank you so much for staying extra. The chat has really expressed kind of just a warm embrace, and we hope that you know that, we are here to support you and give you the microphone and champion your voice whenever we can. And we look forward to collaborating with you going forward and supporting you. And Dr. Nolan, thank you so much for your expertise and your insight and your guidance in terms of what this might look like going forward. I think this is quite an impactful conversation, and I'm so appreciative to all of our panelists, to all of our participants. I'm so sorry we ran out of time, but it is so powerful that that we risk that running out of time, right? I hope we see everyone on August 3rd for our follow-up. Ms. Nix, Dr. Nolan, anybody have anything they'd like to say?
I just want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone in the chat who expressed their support and condolences. And I will be on there August 3rd.
Thank you for
Wonderful. You're part of us now.
that.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Awesome. Thank you.